and welcome or welcome back. My name is V, and today I'd like to watch a video that I've been wanting to see for a very long time, but then I realized that I'm probably going to have a thing or two to say as well, so might as well record it. This video is by Zeppla, and it's her video on where FF14's Dawntrail'S story went wrong. Now, I made a similar video talking about these things, and Zeppla is someone who feels really relatable to me when it comes to her gaming experience, playing World of Warcraft, then going into Final Fantasy XIV and kind of establishing a community there. Not on the same level, but definitely it feels relatable to hear her talk about FF14 and MSQ in general, because she clearly cares about the game and about the story, and I'm curious about how she felt when she finished the story of 7.0. So I figured we should probably watch this video before 7.2 comes out already. So we're gonna watch this. As it says, this video does contain spoilers for the Dawntrail MSQ up to the end of patch 7.0, so if you haven't played through it, it's probably not recommended to watch mine or hers video, but if you have played through it, do make sure to go to Zeppla's channel and watch the original video as well. Leave it a like, leave a comment, and if you're new here on the channel, do subscribe, leave a like for some good luck, and let me know in the comments how you feel about either this video or the MSQ in general. Now let's watch. It's going to be a bit of a long video, so I will pause.
Hey Buns, today I wanted to finally sit down and try to record my thoughts on the Dawntrail main story quest. Let me say straight away that I did not enjoy the Dawntrail main story quest for the most part. There were a few moments that I liked a lot, but they were few and far between, and for the vast majority of the story quest I was actually suffering. So if you enjoyed it, I think that maybe you shouldn't watch this video. I'm glad you enjoyed it, but I really just want to share my critical opinions, and it might be a lot of critical opinions because I wrote them down, and we're looking at 75 pages here, so buckle up. Now the first thing I want to establish is that story is very important to Ffxiv. It is marketed as a story-based game, and new players are expected to go through 300 to 400 hours of story.
By the way, huge shout out to the editors. I already can see that this video is edited very, very well, and it keeps the attention. Like, even though I'm ADHD AF, I'm definitely keeping my eyes on the screen, so if they're keeping my attention, they're probably keeping everybody else's, so great job.
Story before they even get to the end game experience, and the devs' reluctance to remove that story barrier has been attributed to the value of the story. When asked about letting people skip in the past, Yoshi has said, "I'm concerned that if the globally acclaimed storyline can be skipped through a function, the value of the FF14 game itself will be diminished." So far, FF14 has continued to grow while keeping the story as its main focus. So
I am really curious about whether when they finished making the story, whether they took a good long look at the MSQ and thought to themselves, okay, this is the product, this is it, this is the standard of the FF14 MSQ story. It's like the person who said yes to all of that, like, why? How? Like, how could it feel like the same standard? Clearly, the combat is good, the cutscenes are done on a whole different level, the graphical updates really brought a game to a whole nother level, but when it comes to the pacing and the MSQ, who was the playtest? How did this happen? That's what I'd like to know.
So the devs see the main story quest as a core, indivisible component, making Ffxiv what it is. Of course, many people engage with FF14 for other reasons, raiding, fishing, screenshots, but the main focus is and always has been story. This approach has been justified because the story has been incredible up to a point, and the story has earned a lot of critical acclaim for various parts of its main story quest and its side stories in the past, which is why when faced with story beats that don't make any sense, I can't just think about it less, or accept it and move on, or stop trying to get in the heads of characters. All this advice was given to me multiple times by many people throughout my play of the Dawntrail story, and while it was often well-intentioned, these comments are unproductive in a literary discussion. I know that for some of y'all, an emotional connection to the story can outweigh its logical coherence. which makes it easier for you to go along for the ride. And that's happened to me sometimes before, not necessarily with FFXIV, but with other forms of media. And I wish I too had been able to overlook its flaws, so I would have had a better time. Lord knows I tried, but I like critically engaging with a story. That's how we're able to have meaningful discussions. Dismissing that felt really limiting.
Same, yeah.
In other cases, some people saying, oh, we'll just think about it less. They're doing it to stifle discussion. Like, they just want to ignore valid concerns while also indirectly admitting that it might not always have been well.
If you ignore discussion and if you don't give feedback, how are they ever going to know that people are unhappy about it? Clearly, they've received feedback from the Dawntrail'S story, but what I don't appreciate is this defiance on social media and coming out on these interviews and saying that players should forgive Dalamud for completely different reasons than what the actual problem was. It was never about some of the things that Yoshida said that we should forgive her for. The game in itself, Dawntrail, has horrible pacing, and the fact that Dalamud is woven through this quest line and acts the way she does and doesn't let any of the other characters thrive is a big issue. As a side character, she probably would have been completely fine, but she was not meant to be the centerpiece of the story.
Well executed if I'm meant to think about it less. It is okay to like things that others don't, and it's okay to dislike something popular. First, I want to talk about the things that I liked about Dawntrail. Galul Jaja. You have a
good
fun,
character.
Epic duel with him, which made me wish Dawntrail had more solo battles like that. Dungeon bosses were engaging, and they were a lot more fun than they had been in recent memory, although I think dungeons still have a way to go to be super engaging in general. The trials and raids, too, were very creative with amazing new mechanics and refreshing use of the arena space. I loved Otis. Otis was a paladin's paladin. He's funny and charming with a great VA.
I'm Sir Otis Bellona.
The use of filters is
of Alexandria.
His
really
compassion
well
for
done
Galulja
here.
was really endearing. Galulja, too, little guy, was well written. I enjoyed his dialogue a lot. I thought it was believable and sad when he said things like, why didn't you want me? Or, I don't want this, I don't want to be king.
I think Ffxiv was an interesting villain in concept, even though the execution fell.
I disagree. I think they tried to play it too safe with Ffxiv and pretty much replicated the trope of Meteon. Basically put in a cute girl who has a good voice actor, good dialogue, cute little mannerisms of like, hello, whatever. But in the end, she has this sort of deep trauma or something that turns her into a monster, and then you fight her. It's like, at this point, this trope is overused to the point if there's another cute girl in FF14 that they just push into the story, the first thing that I'm gonna think is this girl gonna be the next trial? Is she gonna turn into a boss or whatever? Like, you can't do the same story in the actual MSQ twice in a row and expect that people are gonna be happy about it. That's not how it works.
A little short for me.
An AI copy of a real person that looks, talks, and acts much like the original in many superficial ways, but not the ones that matter most. A program similar to their queen, but without the compassion, mercy, and empathy she might have once had for those outside her dome. That is terrifying and presents many relevant philosophical questions that I wish had been explored more deeply. Regulators and living memory rather complicate our pre-existing knowledge and lore concerning souls and ether, but I'll address those topics in a separate video. There's just not time today for that. And we're talking about things I liked. So back on topic, I enjoyed Erenville's mom, and I actually cried in this scene where Erenville said goodbye to her. I loved the Graha gondola ride. Kryle's arc, which I will talk about later on, was enjoyable, although it was painfully neglected. And I had an excellent time in Shaloni. The lower stakes cowboy side story was really fun. Building the battering ram, war train, and meeting the source trolley guys, that was a treat. Traveling through the world itself is always fun for me, exploring new places, but especially since the graphics update. I was stunned by the beautiful high peaks of Urkopacha, the deep blue forests of Maluk, and likely the best inn room to date. There are times when I look back and, dare I say it, smile. It has been a polarizing expansion, to say the least, and while I did enjoy streaming it, it's probably not for the reasons you would want. In Dawntrail, for me, the good moments, as good as they were not frequent or consistent enough to outweigh the aspects that I didn't enjoy, which were overbearing and suffocating to me. And because these slow parts were very, very, very long and often tedious and unfun, I'd rate the main story a 4 out of 10 at best. I honestly think I spent about a month after finishing the story being depressed because I was shocked by how much I did not connect with the story.
Like, that's the issue. You kind of want to be depressed when you finish Final Fantasy XIV MSQ, but not in this way. You want to have this little bit of existential crisis and realize that the MSQ is over and turn around and realize that there's very little to do right now that compares to the MSQ. You don't want to sit there and be like, is this my game story? Is this what we end up with? You know, it's just...
I've been a big story enjoyer ever since 3.2, and I never felt like my desire to get in the heads of characters to understand them better backfired on me until I played Dawntrail. But when speaking with others, friends and viewers and stuff, it's become apparent that I'm far from the only one who's felt this way. Even the Japanese forums have been ablaze with criticism in the
Wait, I wanna read a little bit of it.
Who's felt this way. Even the Japanese forums have been ablaze with...
What happened to the Yoshida who immediately killed Mombrita? Please kill him out, I'm begging you. This feels like a marriage of ARR's errand boy questing and Stormblood's preachy moralizing. Can't believe they made the MSQ into one really long Beast Tribe quest. Finally thought we could put down our heavy baggage and adventure to our heart's content, but we're stuck babysitting this cat. Ahmed Sal came to this no fun place. Is he an idiot? Feels like they just turned Lise into a cat. Oh my god, that's the best description of Dawntrail ever. It's like they're hiding the lack of substance by dragging out the length of the cutscenes. Wook is seriously empty-headed. Why are we forced to support someone this inexperienced with no concrete policies? That's probably what bothered me the most in the whole story, is not just the lack of choice, but the fact that the MSQ felt political and that we were thrown into a situation where we have no choice but agree with someone who we just know and doesn't have any sort of political experience or any sort of, I guess, experience to lead the country in general. It was weird. Aren't there too many fetch quests? It's been 4 hours and no ID in this dungeon. Where can I start fighting? I want to play the game part already, but the cutscenes to get there are too long. I mean, to be fair, the cutscenes were nice, and I think that they used some camera angles and in general some perspectives and different ways of recording faces and positions of the MSQ NPCs in the cutscenes that they've never done before, and I really like that. Whether they were too long, I don't know, but now that I'm looking back on my edited footage, I can see myself kind of falling asleep there a little bit, which is really embarrassing. So maybe they were. Yoshida's turtle shirt refers to this, huh? I want to leave the succession race to someone else and vacation in the Southern Isles. Like, I didn't expect a fully chill, I guess, expansion where we're just going to vacation, but I was not really into politics, a fight for the throne, and then someone, in my opinion, completely incompetent winning the race.
Criticism in the wake of all this. Now, FF14...
There was more?
I never been ablaze with criticism in the wake of all this. Now,
oh goodness, I keep missing
even the Japanese forums have been ablaze with criticism.
Okay, Estinian is the one who got to have an adventure. This is true. We barely saw him, and he probably had the time of his life, right? Even when I skip the cutscenes, I can correctly guess the gist of what they said. There's seriously no point in watching them. Oh, that's depressing. Even if the starting point for the next 10 years saga, they have to go as far as copying 2.0's slog. I mean, I was talking to Neon about this, and he said that he sees Dawntrail as a realm reborn or reworked. but I'm not sure we wanted that, you know? Uklamat is a stereotypical idealized character. It's hard to relate to her. She's the protagonist of a manga aimed at elementary schoolers. Yeah, exactly. And this is what I brought up in the video about Uklamat as well. It's just she feels like an idealist, and she's there to kind of give you hope that we as adults have, I'm sorry, but we've long lost it. She's very idealistic and unrelatable in that sense.
Wake of all this.
The dialogue is too template-like. There being no suspense about the next development is a fatal mistake. That's true. I could guess pretty much everything that's going to happen, even without the knowledge of Final Fantasy IX. And I was worried about like Final Fantasy IX spoilers, and then I realized that I have nothing to worry about because I can just guess the story till the very end, which was exhausting. Tired of seeing so many lizards. Lizards were nice. Come on. From start to finish, it's just problems caused by low IQ lizards. Maybe slaughtering all the savages wasn't such a bad idea. Oh my god. Okay.
FF14 has had ups and downs before in its story, be it from main story quest or side stories. The lows were generally isolated for the most part, or fixed later on. With Dawntrail, there were days where I got so frustrated with how things were going that I had to just stop after a couple hours, even though I had set the bar on the floor. I really enjoyed Erenville's presence, thank God for him, but most of the time, the team got split up and I would be assigned to the group without him in it, which honestly felt just so cruel and unusual. And while clearer stakes were introduced in the latter half, core
the one good
cutscene,
right?
persisted throughout the entire
Not the only one,
quest
but
that I want to explore here today. I know the devs worked hard on this story, so out of respect for them, I'll try to convey my feelings in the most constructive and honest way that I can. While there are compelling moments that do deserve praise, more often than not, they don't get the chance to shine as they should, being weighed down by poor pacing, questionable writing decisions, and by that I mean the plot undermines itself. There's a lack of VA, there's excessive cutscenes, and convenient plot devices that violated the suspension.
To this day, I just don't understand why Final Fantasy XIV is not more voiced. I think that a lot of people would just be honored to be in this game, even if they weren't overpaid as voice actors. And I just, for the life of me, don't understand why there's so many cutscenes and so little voice acting. And a lot of games that work with a lot less budget understand the importance of voice acting. Now, I know that they translate the game into multiple languages and that it's a big project, but I also think that it's so important for the story game to have voices.
No disbelief. Ffxiv is no stranger to plot convenience and sometimes does rely on it, but it's never been to this extreme degree, being present at every turn of the main story of Dawntrail. Dawntrail frequently suffers from a lack of consequences, making character development feel unearned, rushed, or non-existent. This issue is compounded by redundant, bland dialogue that makes every character sound like the same character. Uklamat seems to have no limitations that affect her in any meaningful way, and she isn't so much a well-developed character as she is an omnipresent force who smothers the rest of the story, not giving others a chance to breathe. In today's video, I'd like to deep dive into my constructive feedback for Dawntrail. So let's hop to it. Let's start with pacing. Stretches of time where you lose momentum and it drags on and on while you carry out pointless filler quests like talking to 20 researchers in Labyrinthos for an hour or fetching cheese before the Titan trial in Realm Reborn. Little to no combat, boring quest design, and a lack of voice acting resulting in a slog. FF14 has never had enough VA, so these problems aren't exactly new, but in Dawntrail, the lack of VA at extremely pivotal moments made the issue even more glaring. The scene where Zoraal betrays Surreal and gains access to the Golden City? Not voiced. The scene where Zoraal shows up with a golden alpaca and then lays out his plans for world domination? Not voiced. The scene where Thancred and Eorzea are revealed to be in Tyral supporting Kona? Not voiced. These decisions are very hard to understand and made parts of the game feel low budget. There are countless other examples that make you wonder why. Why wasn't this voiced? Speak to 0 out of 3 adventurers became a meme in Dawntrail because it's often tedious, repetitive, and boring dialogue can make it a momentum killer. For example, you arrive at Heritage Found and it's gone through some kind of time warp. You see people with neural links plugged into their brains, And you probably have a million questions about what the hell is going on here. But instead of asking about any of that, you talk to 0 of 3 farmers. One says, "Hi, I'm a farmer. I raise livestock." Another says, "Hi, I'm a farmer. This is our storehouse where we store plants. The work is hard, but I'll not deny I take great satisfaction in what we do." The next one, "I tend the fields and keep the soil fertile.
I manage
This is a
lamps,
lamp,
right?
And I fix lamps when they break. Every day is an opportunity to learn and grow." Like, I talked to 3 farmers, and guess what I found out? They are farming. I also felt that I had talked to 1 farmer because...
Okay, so when it comes to these particular quests, I'm very patient because I play a lot of RPGs, JRPGs, and sometimes you do have to have these little introduction quests, but I think that they could have made them more consequential, more ominous, more engaging. There could have been a lot of stuff put into the game that would make you want to run around, explore dialogues, do side quests, and discover what the hell is going on with this dome and people in it, and how are they farming, how are they doing all these things. Not just like, oh, the work is hard but we push through. It was just a very underwhelming experience.
They all sounded like the same person. It was a bland, corporate, inoffensive voice that relays information in a neutral and factual way. I'm going to talk more about character voice later, but I picked this example out of the countless that there are because this was a rare time when the story actually had momentum that made you want to talk to the locals and ask questions like, "Hey, what's that glowy thing plugged into your brain?
Right?
Are you trapped in this dome? Do you want out? What year is it?" But instead, we have inane discussions about fertile soil and lamps. Like, this is the first, that was the 3rd time we discussed fertile soil in Dawntrail. The 2nd time was in Mamuk with their soil, and the 1st time was in the Hanu village where we inspect the soil fertility. Like, I felt like I was in a social studies textbook most of the time rather than going on an adventure. It was a whole lot of words where basically nothing was said. Talking to 3 locals as an objective doesn't have to be a pace killer. After Tesleen and Shadowbringers transformed, you needed to talk to the locals too. And the first one was sobbing and said, "It's just so unfair." Tesleen was always so cheery with the patients, telling them not to be scared.
I love these comparisons.
There wouldn't be any pain. Of all the people in the world to suffer such a fate, you can hear the anger. They're struggling to process it. These are real emotions you can connect with. You empathize. It grips you. Like, it pulls you into the story. When Alice said, "I can't be the shoulder they lean on, not like this," another villager said, "Me, I don't have the words. Without a body, we can't even give her a proper burial." And she cared about that sort of thing, about giving people the chance to say their goodbyes. See, that's a new angle on this that you might not have thought of. That's realistic, emotive dialogue, people reacting in human ways or telling you something that you didn't know that helps add to the story's momentum rather than killing it. It's like Dawntrail often went out of its way to kill its own momentum before you got too excited, building you up for the next thing and then slamming you with inertia. Enter Kopachin. The entire zone is building up to Wook Lamont capturing the alpaca. And then that part happens off screen. Given her portrayal as clumsy and incompetent, I feel like they'd missed an opportunity to have a funny scene or a montage of her trying and failing to capture one. There was a lot of potential for humor throughout this expansion that went untapped. When it's building up to the Giants area and you get to the exit of the zone, you're forced to wait and click on the sparklies 3 times because Wook has gotten kidnapped in an inconceivably moronic fashion, not just for her, but for all of us who stood around watching this happen, even though you could see the Moblin village entrance. And so it doesn't even make sense that you wouldn't notice her getting hauled off between here and there. It's like we all became Peter Parker in Spider-Man 2 when he lost his powers and just watched crimes getting committed because it wasn't his business anymore.
You could have taken that guy apart.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
Why did we just let her go off on her own for the first time ever when she's so absent-minded and gets distracted and lost all the time? Building up to the City of Gold. And you see the gate in the dungeon and it's incredible. And you're like, oh wow, we finally made it to the gate, awesome. And you get edged right at the end and you're told to go back. You can't go in there yet. Fixing the train to see Erinville's mom and the bunny village. But you can't ride on it yet because you gotta leave the area and come back later. The build up and the excitement of getting to eat a taco that you never get to eat. Also, speaking of weird pacing, in living memory, Ffxiv starts a countdown to murder billions of people across several reflections. And you hear the countdown on the loudspeaker. And then, with zero urgency, you ask 3 villagers for advice on a cool treat. You wear a silly costume and put on a play. You take a quiz on the history of the Malala. Like, I do think that zone had some nice story moments, but we need to acknowledge the bizarre pacing of a genocide countdown ticking down in the background while you go on capybara and gondola rides. You, the player, know this countdown will wait for the plot, but the character's total lack of urgency, given what's happening, felt really odd.
Unrealistic,
I do think the zone would be worse without the slower pace that it had. But maybe that countdown should have started near the end. I don't know. But the first time I got slammed with narrative inertia was during the Tulial tour at the beginning. I think that was when I first realized what I was in for. Wuklamot makes you read 8 pillars that give a brief summary of every place and every type of person that Gluljaja met and every single leg of his journey. After the first 4, I remember thinking, and I think I even said out loud, oh my God, that was only half? It was so boring and dry and so obvious that this is going to be your journey too. And I'm thinking,
no.
All right,
Don't
well,
you.
we're going to meet the Moblins, the Giants, the Hanu, the Pelu, and it's all laid out and made clear.
It was extremely predictable in a way that the story was just laid bare to you, and you were told exactly where you're gonna go, who you're gonna meet, and at that point, going around and interacting with these pillars and reading through these stories just had you thinking, damn, this better be good, because there is a lot of it. And it made me wonder if this is what our MSQ is going to be like. Not only was it not very good, there was also so much more crammed into this MSQ that didn't get to shine because we spent so much time doing that.
That this was Galuljaja's journey to unite Tyrell, the Tulial saga. And then you get your tablets that match the pillars, and Wuklamot says, this is the Tulial saga. The king says, yes, my journey through Tyrell. Then you go back to the pillars and check to make sure that it really is. The tablet matches the pillars, which it does, because again, for the 3rd time, this is the journey through Tyrell that Galuljaja took that you are going through now. Apart from the excessive, redundant exposition, I also felt that this spoiled the element of discovery, because part of the fun in exploring a new place is not knowing what's around the corner. Right from the get-go, they tell you who you will meet, their race, their culture, their history, what they're like, what area they live in. Hell, they even tell you that Ketenram and Valigarmanda will be relevant. This is an early example of how telling rather than showing can affect the story momentum. For a story advertising,
I don't know if it was ever expected of us to go ahead and remember what was in these pillars. Like, someone should have assumed that it was going to resemble reading a paragraph out of a history book. It definitely was more telling than showing.
as an adventure, eliminating so much uncertainty before we had even set out felt odd. I would rather experience the gradual revelation of the world. Tyrell has always been a mysterious continent too, since the Realm Reborn days. So this hurts even more because of that. Something else introducing inertia is just too many cutscenes. Here, someone described a cutscene that's followed up by another straight away.
I really disagree with this because I think that cutscenes are incredibly important for FF14, but I think that voice acted cutscenes are just next to non-existent. I watched my footage after I finished playing and I was just reading and reading and reading and reading. To the point that when you're a content creator and you want to make some highlights from the game, it kind of feels silly to put these cutscenes into a separate video and say, hey, this cool thing happened, when you're the one reading through the dialogues. You want a full-on cutscene. And I remember when I was playing through Endwalker, after pretty much every session, I had like 2 or 3 amazing cutscenes to work with and make videos out of, because something would happen where I would just get to sit back and actually enjoy what's on the screen. And that wasn't the case with the Dawntrail. With Dawntrail, I just kept on reading and reading and reading, to the point that whenever I wanted to make a video out of Dawntrail, I would have to manually scroll through the entire track of my recording and identify whether or not there were some important moments there, as all I could see is just me reading endless text.
Then, in the same spot, another one plays. Then you walk 5 feet, and with Woklamat, you talk to 3 more NPCs, which triggers 3 different cutscenes. Then you go back to Kryl, and again, it's another cutscene, making 7 cutscenes in a row with 0 gameplay or fights in between. Another core problem with the pacing of this story is how the initial momentum is set and your implied motivation as the player. In Heaven's Ward, you see dragons attacking Ishgard, and so it's natural and logical that you would want to protect it from Nidhogg, as well as support your friends who've had your back from the very beginning. In Shadowbringers, you see it's permanently daytime and their world is on the brink of destruction. You want to help all the innocent people from the Sin Eaters and save the First, while also saving your own. In Stormblood's war against Garlemald, you have multiple strong motivations for your involvement: locating Omega to prevent the Empire from finding it, searching for a missing and powerful primal, and freeing your neighbors from occupation by tyrants who previously attempted to conquer you during the events of Realm Reborn. These are safe bets. Most players will agree on these motivations. It's not a hard sell. It's obvious, with the assumption that you're not a chaotic evil person that wants to see the world burn. This is most likely.
As I've just finished playing through the normal raid, and I don't want to give normal raid spoilers. By normal, I mean the 8-man raid. I don't want to talk too much about the story, but I think that that particular raid is the proof that they can make a good story with actual motivation. So the raid, obviously, it starts off as an arena thing, but it gives you a higher purpose, an emotional purpose, a reason for you to continue to fight in this arena, which I think they failed with in the MSQ, and it makes me wonder if the same person was in charge of the story of the normal raid and the MSQ, because honestly, it feels like 2 different people, and if that's the case, I wish they had swapped.
Why people felt more engaged with the second half of Dawntrail when Alexandrian robots attack Tuliolol and Sphene goes into killbot mode. It's much more obvious why you, the player, should care about what's happening. Dawntrail's main plot, the Rite of Succession, treats your support of Woklamat as a matter of course, something that should be as natural to you as protecting Ishgard from Nidhogg. Her claim is the driving factor behind all events in the Rite of Succession, and the story's momentum hinges almost entirely upon it. This is a linear story, and you can't actually make a choice, which means the writers put a lot of pressure on themselves to sell this idea to you of supporting her claim, and yet
They didn't.
Bizarrely, they do the opposite. After meeting Woklamat in 655, you can tell Graha you're undecided about supporting her, and he says, I don't blame you. He even suggests you to take your leave if you're not feeling it, so not a lot of confidence here. Erenville says this decision shouldn't be taken lightly and offers you a chance to back out later on, emphasizing that it is a questionable choice. Characters you trust advise caution or support someone else altogether, but the game forces you to support Woklamat. This created a
It's like, it felt like the game was edging you with this alternative choice, but it was never offered. And I remember waiting for a chance to sort of back out for some sort of a plot twist where we realize that it's not a good choice, where something happens, but no, she just ends up, the same thing happens that they promised that would happen at the beginning. She promises that she's gonna win the competition, be a hero, and that's exactly what happens. No plot twist whatsoever there.
a disconnect between my logical reasoning and what's going on in the plot. But based on an early conversation with Galul Jaja, where he acknowledges Woklamat is not fit to rule, and your character can agree, it's safe to say that your intended first impressions are that she is incompetent, immature, naive, and ignorant of her people. That said, she's portrayed not just as someone who's unprepared for the role, but as someone lacking the basic competence expected of an adult, someone who needs to be babysat with Erenville commenting, "I agreed to serve as a guide, not a nursemaid."
Yep.
He said this immediately after Wuk-Lamat got distracted by waterfalls and got stuck in the mud in the short distance between the quest point and the town you are going to. A place she has already been to before, where she then couldn't remember the basic Hanu greeting, even though many of them do live in her city. We're shown that she has a low approval rating because she hasn't accomplished anything of note. She hasn't been traveling much, she barely leaves home, and knows very little about her country. In one instance, when Wook goes missing, someone asks, "Did she get lost?" But there's only the one road. Erenville, "Well, I wouldn't put it past her." So the way others talk about her doesn't inspire confidence.
This video is actually very painful to watch because everything that I'm seeing so far is just basically being reminded of these bizarre decisions to put certain sentences into the game. And it really does make me wonder if someone had played before this game was released.
It's revealed that some of your trusted allies support Kona, another claimant who brought Aetherites, dirigibles, and trains to Tyrol, who studied in Charlian, and who's dedicated his entire life to improving his country. So discovering there's another viable claimant further weakens your motivation to be there. Wook is presented as the candidate of peace, and yet Thancred says on behalf of himself and Urianger that their reason to support Kona is in order to preserve peace. So the narrative is at odds with itself, with Wook's portrayal diminishing her credibility, making it hard to be invested in her success. And yet, we are in a story where my investment in her success is the driving force behind the plot. It's revealed by the current Dawn servant that the reason for the journey is to...
It's very simple. Next time you make an expansion, don't make a political expansion where a player is forced to vote for a person who they don't want to vote for. I don't know who thought that was a good idea.
Cultivate a leader rather than choose one. And I think that would make more sense if he had just picked up these people off the street and had to pick one fast. But he is Papa. He raised them all except for one of the claimants. So given her royal upbringing, it seems implausible that she would lack so much basic knowledge. He says she only knows what she's seen in the city, but again, Hanu lived there. A basic greeting would be expected knowledge. She is surprised by the Pelu in town who asks for payment in return for information, but if she knows what's in the city, at least this shouldn't come as a surprise. Her brother also has a lot of experience with the Pelu. When she meets the Moblins, she doesn't know what a potsworn is, but it is common knowledge that Erenville has. This Moblin practice is understood by Rolply, her Pelu friend in the city, and when we ask Fontaine if he wants to be a potsworn, keep in mind, he had just arrived on the same boat from Eorzea that we were on. He knows what a potsworn is already. He knows more about the Moblins in like a day or two at most than Wuk-Lamat has learned in her entire life. I just find it hard to believe. I think they wanted Wuk-Lamat to show up and be clueless in every place that we visited to establish a starting point for her growth, but I think that the way they went about it did a disservice to her character.
They just made her look really silly, ignorant, and dumb at the end of the day, because if she was a child, it would have been somewhat fine and somewhat expected to not know these things or maybe not understand them very well, but she is not a child. She is a political candidate for the throne. And she should have basic understanding of what is going on in their country.
Also undermining the plot. It is just incongruous with common sense and other established facts, which gives me the sense that it is simply incoherent. But we have to go with what we've been given, and we can therefore only assume that she has a total lack of curiosity about her people. She only seems to care now that she has an opportunity to become Dawn Servant, and one could argue that she's power hungry because of this, staking her own claim rather than throwing her weight behind her brother, despite both of them essentially wanting the same thing. But of course, based on the story in retrospect, we can reasonably assume that a power-hungry Wuk-Lamat isn't the intended takeaway, but that this is a sort of misunderstanding that can arise when character motivations and development are not clearly conveyed. This can lead to unintended interpretations of the character you're trying to write. Galul Jaja is portrayed as a caring father who wants to cultivate good leaders, and later on, Wook tells us that her training was relentless, but Because this is something we were told and not shown, there's no evidence of her having gone through rigorous training of any kind. The claim is unsubstantiated and it lacks emotional impact. It doesn't add value to the story. And with what was mentioned earlier, it makes everything else all the more confusing and incoherent. A big trope about royalty is that it's a stifling environment to grow up in because of all the rules, the expectation, and training that's pushed upon you. But, and I don't mean this in a mean way, I honestly don't know if Wuklamot even went to school. Given her upbringing, it seems unlikely that she wouldn't have learned about her own culture and people beforehand. So the revelation about the journey's purpose felt like a forced plot device to justify Wuklamot's apparent unpreparedness for the role, and it felt contrived and unconvincing, like the story bending over backwards to accommodate a predetermined outcome without supporting it with believable character growth. Felt like the writers were saying, yes, she's not fit to rule, we've shown you that, so I know this doesn't make sense right now, but hang in there. And yet it never made sense later on either, often making even less sense. I'd prefer to be shown.
I was expecting some sort of a payoff. I was ready to be patient, to sit through the MSQ and just wait for something to happen, even if it meant something bad happening to Wuklamot or Tuliolal or whatever that will completely change our perspective on Wuklamot. Bizarrely enough, it did happen. We did get the whole attack on Tuliolal. Wuklamot has lost her father, and she even had that whole speech, which I honestly bought as a plausible part of the story. I was like, okay, so this makes sense. From now on, things are going to be different. And then tomorrow morning, she wakes up, and she is the same Wuklamot that we've known before. So it just felt like an additional disappointment, and like the story felt flat for no reason.
Why I should hang in there rather than told. Though of course sometimes this is unavoidable. Also, in terms of pacing, by stating that he won't give up the throne if there's no suitable leader by the end, yes, it is wise and in character for him, but it dissipates narrative tension and removes a sense of urgency from the journey that this all hinges around. The rite of succession is framed as an opportunity to cultivate a leader, yet he doesn't want to give up power unless an ideal leader emerges, which implies a lack of faith in the process. This contradiction made it feel like a charade that might even be pointless. By providing an easy out for the king, it lowered the stakes. Now, you don't need high stakes for a good story, but you do need clear stakes, and this undermined the clarity of those stakes. So, we haven't even started talking about Wuklamot as a character, and before I continue further, I need to clarify something. For those of you who might be thinking, damn, Zep, you're talking a lot about Wuklamot. Yes, I am, and will continue to do so for a bit. Unfortunately, I have to do this to be fair with my criticisms and to include as much as possible. Wuklamot is featured an unnatural amount in the story, so because of that, I have to do the same. It just happens that she's present.
What I really appreciate about Zepla's videos is that she goes into depth when it comes to research on the things that we've seen in the game. So I think that some of these things hold a lot of merit, and they serve as proof to everyone who just decides to forget about everything we've seen and say, all right, it wasn't that bad or whatever. But when you see these things, there's no way for you to escape the truth that these things were just put into the game, and that's just not the FF14 that we know.
Present in or involved with the vast majority of situations in Dawntrail from beginning to end. Like, I wish I didn't have to talk so much about her, but I cannot avoid it because she's tied to every single part of the entire story. Bluntly, Wuklamot isn't real. No one is, but I cannot feel strong emotions toward her besides maybe fatigue, because I simply do not see her as a fleshed out character in the world. Wook feels like several early drafts in one where a few superficial traits were decided on, like tacos, alpacas, motion sickness, but not fully developed or supported by meaningful backstory that would give her the necessary depth and complexity to make her a believable person. In 6.5, she'd just gotten off a really long boat ride to Charlian, but she doesn't show any signs of seasickness, nor does she mention that long boat ride being difficult. We take another boat to the hunt location, and she comments, "So we have to take a ship? Ugh, and I've barely set foot on dry land," which sounds more like being annoyed about having to be on a ship again, which is understandable. She had been on one for days prior. This is confirmed by the fact that we arrive and she's chipper and unbothered, ready to hunt and wanting to eat bears. We get off that boat after the hunt, and again, she's not seasick. In fact, she's hungry. Another issue is her pointing out the icy landscape and saying it rivals Yogg-Turaul, but we know that the only ice that exists in Yogg-Turaul is in the mountains of Urkopacha, and she has never been there before. She also says there's rumors the contest will involve Valagarmanda, but at this point, there is no conceivable way anyone could know that Bakulja.
I'm starting to think that maybe I shouldn't have watched this video because it's pointing out some glaring inconsistencies that, if in any way, shape, or form possible, it's making me have even less love and faith for the MSQ, because what the hell, you know, there were some things that I even didn't notice. And a lot of these things I've spoken about, but these particular details, they just feel like a death by 1,000 cuts. That's what it feels like to watch this video.
Jaja would unleash the monster. Another kind of a nitpick would be that she says she's terrified of heights. When we ride on a dirigible, she says she's never been good with heights, but we did ride over massively high chasms in 655 on the zip line, and she stands on the very edge of the highest point in the city in one of her speeches. You know, look, when things like this happen, maybe that last thing is kind of minor, but the character loses a sense of continuity and consistency that would have maybe made her a little more believable. I want to care about Wuklamot, and I like the potential role that I imagined she would have, but she's little more than a tool that was far too heavily leaned on to clumsily push quest progression forward. Ultimately, only one thing defines Wuklamot, and it's what she's told you in 655. Papa needs a successor to preserve his legacy of peace. My father's getting old. He wishes to relinquish the throne to a worthy successor, one who can preserve his legacy. Everything my father's done to give us peace, he would drag us back into war. No matter what, I must win. This is it. She represents her father's peace. Wuklamot will preserve the peace. It is her one motivation. It is her identity, preserving her father's legacy of peace. It doesn't feel backed by a personal understanding of what the legacy means to her or how life led her to embrace that as her goal. If she loves peace because Zoraal threatens it, doesn't tell us why peace matters to her personally. It's circular reasoning. It's like, I want peace because peace is good. Well, we're not getting anywhere. Like, why is she dedicated to keeping the peace beyond its inherent value? Her supporters say they support her because she will preserve the peace. Galul Jajabil. When talking about herself, trying to relate to Mabalu, she says she will preserve Tural's peace. A noble goal, which on its own doesn't constitute a well-rounded personality. It's repetition without depth. I mentioned that Wuklamot is shown to be ignorant, which is a flaw. And as a person with flaws, she is not a Mary Sue. However, much like a Mary Sue, Wuklamot's flaws are not story relevant. Wuklamot admits that she's lived a sheltered life, and she acknowledges that she has been ignorant. But what do these flaws reveal about her? Why is she sheltered? Why is she ignorant? Who has she been, and who will she become? Is she a sheltered and out-of-touch princess? Did she not care to learn about the commoners? No, because we're also told that she loves talking to people and is seen as approachable. Well, now we have a problem of she talks to everyone in the city, but she doesn't learn anything from them, which is a self-contradiction. Why was she convinced she understood Turaul? Was she arrogant? That would have been interesting. Did she treat everyone the same? Did she offend people in the past and is now realizing her harmful assumptions and generalizations she made? No, these flaws had potential to make her more real, but they weren't integrated into her development. They're just superficial. They don't cause her to make critical mistakes. They don't stop or impede her in completing any of the rites, so they just feel tacked on and extraneous. I should note that in her Dawn Servant speech, she thanks the Yakhui of Kazumauka for teaching her about their culture, let the Yakhui live in Urkopacha. I assume this is a typo and not evidence of her unaddressed flaw, but the fact that such a serious error made it into release is a cause for... But the fact that such a serious... Assume this is a typo. Teach Dawn Servant speech, she thanks the and extraneous. I should note that in her Dawn Servant speech, she thanks the Yakhui of Kazumauka for teaching her about their culture, but the Yakui live in Urkapacha. I assume this is a typo and not evidence of her unaddressed flaw, but the fact that such a serious
Even the chat-
of her unaddressed flaw,
Yeah,
but
Korean,
the fact that such a serious error made it into release is a cause for concern. I do hope that they will do more thorough checks of the script in the future. But moving on. Wooklamot has bad things happen to her.
I didn't notice
and
that.
As a person who faces hardship, she's not a Mary Sue, however. Much like a Mary Sue, the hardships she faces is unrelated to her flaws. Problems solve themselves for her in ways that defy reason, rather than
in ways that we are there to solve them, and then she shows up and takes credit for it. It's so offensive.
presenting her with challenges that would allow her to grow and evolve. The plot would often bend over backwards to accommodate Wooklamot as she is. That is, the world stopped working in logical ways in order to convince the player that Wook has the key character traits needed to be an effective leader from the start, even when this defies logical sense. For example, we learned from that Galul Jaja got the Moblins to stop doing slavery by telling them that happy workers do a better job than sad slaves. It's because he spoke to them about happiness that he achieved this, and Wooklamot also likes talking to people about happiness, so you're meant to see her potential as a ruler. But this story isn't believable at all.
No.
Asking nicely to stop kidnapping and enslaving people isn't enough. Why would it be? Oversimplifications like this make the world seem less real, and it just feels a little insensitive. When the Hanu are starving and their crops are dead, Wook says, the people are sad, but during the festival, they were happy, so we should have the festival because it made them happy before. And everyone says, but Wook, what does that have to do with the crops? And no one knows. But as luck would have it, the festival boat is a magical focus that makes the crops grow.
Of course,
which
she
the
knew.
villagers
She had the
themselves
answer, right?
Forgot about, and we don't find out why they forgot either. We're informed that the boat makes food grow by a historian living nearby who's been watching the Vanu starve, and he just didn't tell them about it. Before you ask why, it's not because he's selfish or evil or apathetic. He just doesn't have a reason. There's no reason it isn't addressed. That is because he's a plot device, masquerading as a character. He doesn't have an inner world or depth or agency. He just exists to deliver exposition that, hey, the boat is magic for food. Later on, their leader, who asked for your help to begin with, does remember mentioning the boat worked well to achieve similarly impressive results when she was a child. Prior to this moment, I guess she...
And he just magically forgot about that and remembered only after Wooklamot came to the rescue. Got it.
You forgot. This was a very contrived way to ensure Wooklamot could win just by caring about people's happiness. You're encouraged to believe that this trait shows her leadership potential. The solution magically appears to fit her seemingly unrelated suggestion, and it just makes the story seem engineered to validate her idea rather than unfolding naturally. This isn't how the world works. This isn't Wook meeting a challenge. This is the challenge meeting Wook. If people are hungry, your first priority as a leader should be about feeding them before throwing a party. Even if that party ended up working out, it doesn't make me less concerned about her decision-making skills or sense of responsibility. But the right is not about her learning about herself or what kind of a leader she wants to be. It's us learning her approach is the correct one. So if Wooklamot's flaws aren't explored and the world accommodates her as she is, what is she doing in the story? I believe the intent is to present affirmation as a sustaining force behind Wooklamot's resolve. With resolve in this context, meaning how hard she believes in peace and happiness after getting all that affirmation. Just after meeting the High Luminary, we have a cutscene that feels simplistic to the point of patronizing. I've heard it compared to Blue's Clues or Dora the Explorer, so I think it's worth going through it. Wooklamot reads the engraving, Galul Jaja, master of resolve and reason, champion of peace. 3 things. She repeats it. Master of resolve and reason, champion of peace. Zeralja says he carved a path with martial skill. Kona says he was clever in trapping Valagarmanda. Wooklamot says martial skill and clever thinking. Well, I can't compete with Zoraal, who mastered the head of resolve techniques. I don't have the knowledge of Kona, who's most like the head of reason. What is it that I got from Papa? Something I do better than the others.
Nothing.
And she's really got to think about this. She asks you, and you can be like me and say, I don't know. What else defines your father aside from strength and knowledge? You know, I wanted to let her work it out. And she says, what else defines him? Of course, Papa's love for peace, for his people. That's what he's given me. And now I'm fighting to preserve the peaceful Tyrell he's built. Again, the same thing she told you when you met her in 6.55. This is the one and only thing that defines her as an entity. No, she also seemed very confident on this point back then.
The most bizarre thing about it is that interacting with her has never made me feel like she wants peace. She is power hungry, she is competitive, and most importantly, she is a fighter and a warrior, and you can absolutely fight for peace, but I don't think you can be a pacifist, the kind of pacifist that she claims to be, and still be the warrior with this burning desire to fight your enemies and whatnot. She just keeps talking about peace, peace, peace. But then we go into the dome to essentially start a war. So I don't think that she is as peaceful a person as the story is making her out to be.
Which makes this revelation feel meaningless. Repeating what we already know doesn't add depth. It's not a realization. It's not a believable way for a character to behave. After defeating Valagarmonda, she appears to be deep in thought, troubled, unresponsive. She visits you in the middle of the night and she's like, we need to talk. It's really important. She's like, we need to take a walk. I was so worried. I'm thinking, oh my God, what is going on? Well, it turns out that what Wooklamot needs is more affirmation of who she is now and who she's been this whole time. We meet an old woman who gets us started saying, you're the claimant with the greatest love for peace. She then reminds you of that scene I just mentioned. And Wooklamot, then we get to the top of this thing and Wooklamot says, do you remember what I said at the top of Warkor Zormor? That I would fight to preserve Papa's peaceful Tyrell?
We remember.
Well, I've been thinking about a lot since then, what peace really means, if it's just the absence of war. And here we go, the revelation that kept her up all night, that had her wake me up in the middle of the night to talk about it. I realized nothing gives me greater joy than the happiness of others. Life has its ups and downs, but the company of family and friends and the music of their laughter is what makes life worth living. If my sister did this to me, someone I love with my whole heart, who I would take a bullet for any day of the week, without a second thought, if she woke me up in the dead of night to tell me we need to talk, it's important. She took me to the very top of a hill and waited till 5 o'clock in the morning to be like, hey, what I need to tell you is that I love peace and happiness. I'd strangle her. This is not how people act. She feels like a mascot or a cardboard cutout. I expected to enjoy her, but I found it completely impossible to relate to her in a human way. She says, when I become Dawn Servant, I'll build on Papa's peace. Our people will live together in happiness. If it wasn't for you all listening and feeling and thinking along with me, I would have never learned so much in so short a time. I found this unconvincing. She loved peace before. She loves it now, and she'll keep loving it later on. Like, I cannot call that growth. Not long after this scene, the newfound confidence from heavy affirmations allows Wooklamot to easily overpower Bakul Jaja and his cronies alone. And in the battle, her big realizations are, what do you think? I must carry on Papa's legacy, his love for our people. I'll protect my people's happiness. Same things she always says, but once more, with feeling. She hasn't changed at all, besides clear, inexplicable power gains. When character development is primarily framed as a realization,
I also don't like how they tried to put it literally in the dialogue. It's like, hey, Wooklamot is changing. This character has growth. You don't need the game to tell you that there is growth in a character. You could feel it with all of these previous amazing characters before. You could even feel it in someone like Fan Daniel. and so many different, I don't know, it's just so frustrating how the game tried to indoctrinate us into these beliefs and to literally tell us that things are happening. Don't tell me, show me.
Of inherent strength, it feels superficial and unearned. It lacks substance as a journey. A journey implies that point A and point B are different. I've heard people try to argue that Wuklamot doesn't suffer any losses, but I disagree. She does. But they're quickly glossed over. They're handled in abrupt, shallow ways that advance the plot without deepening her character. For example, her city is attacked and many people are killed. She says she failed in her duty to protect and that she feels shame and regret, a loss. I saw a cutscene where she's trying to help a citizen and she's looking up at warships in the sky and she says she can't reason with Eorzea, so to protect the peace, she's got to fight. So this conversation was had, but it did not impact me emotionally because the writing didn't set it up properly. Telling, not showing her shame and regret is a missed opportunity. Remember Lena, who also felt that she had failed in her duty in the aftermath of an attack? She gave her report, she tried to keep doing her job, but she stumbled and she fell from her injury. And her powerlessness in that moment is what made her real.
Hale and hearty and still alive to mourn those who are not, who I failed to protect when they needed me most. We've come so far, so goddamn far! I could have sworn the end was in sight, and now they will never see it.
Her coming to terms with her own limitations, that made the attack feel real also. But after the attack,
and it was voiced.
Like our father before us, we will lead with resolve and reason to restore peace to our nation. She says, Tuliala will not fall, will prevail, and peace and happiness will be ours again. What we hear is more of the same. I'm not convinced that growth has occurred in any meaningful way. Wuklamot suffers from adversity. She watched her dad get murdered, and she wants to kill her own brother as a result. She tells little Eorzea that after the attack, I was filled with rage. I told myself over and over that he's no brother of mine.
So no
we
peace.
Don't see that. We're told. Cool. It happens off screen, so it's empty. It's forgettable. It's a wasted opportunity to see Wook go ballistic with a warrior rage because she felt betrayed and her whole entire world just got turned upside down. And no, one small scene as her father dies isn't enough. Dawntrail was slow to resolve pointless problems and very quick to move past the big things that mattered, tying things up in neat little bows and marching on when what we really needed to see was the characters stumble and fall and struggle to pick themselves back up, so we can root for them when they do. Did she re-examine her peaceful worldview, learning about the necessity of war, a war carried out in self-defense? Yes, but I didn't care. It's because of the writing. Did she learn that she wanted people to be happy, as Ffxiv did? Doesn't always lead to good outcomes. Or did she simply act because killing people is bad? You could very charitably infer that she has come to understand these nuances based on her determination to kill Eorzea and fight Ffxiv. But for me, that veers dangerously into using an imaginative headcanon to make a character more well-rounded than they are written. The fact is, these dilemmas are not confronted in meaningful ways that would be memorable. So there are missed opportunities to flesh out Wook as a character. Frankly, by the time events are happening that might challenge Wook.
What I see Wuklamot as a canvas, and she could have been so much more, considering how much of the screen time she's had. And I feel like if only she had the character growth that made us want to cheer for her, things would have been different. But she was just a flat character from the beginning till the end. All of her thoughts and beliefs remained much the same, except for the newfound rage and hunger for killing.
To grow or change in meaningful ways, she's already taken up so much screen time at that point that many people, myself included, had lost interest in her journey. And at that point, it was time for Erenville, Kefkiwa, Kryl, and her parents, Ffxiv, Otis, and Eorzea, to get their space to breathe and have their stories told. Which leads us into the most obvious problem with how Wuklamot was used in the story. She far surpasses every other character, both in number of words spoken and the number of times you need to speak with her as an objective. It is to a degree that is simply unacceptable. I myself felt highly fatigued. Although I enjoyed her presence for the first couple zones, over time I felt smothered. A person I utterly failed to connect with, who seemed ever-present and unchanging, a fact of life, a condition, a background, a foreground. Every quest led back to her and every character sounded like her. When I closed my eyes, I could see her face. I'm serious. I escaped her in Zone 4. She became Dawn Servant and I thought I was free. But what a fool I was.
This is the same thing that I said when we were finished with that part of the MSQ. I was like, oh, I'm so glad that she's left behind. I thought that we were just basically doing an early release moment where she's going to remain there. And from time to time, we're going to go and report to her or whatever. But no, she kept on following us and it was the biggest drag.
What?
Time to speak with Woklamat again. It's time to. We had the story being excellent, and it's time to speak.
Melodrama aside, she was clingy, for lack of a better term. The way I would write a clingy friend type character, if that is what I was going for, on purpose. There was a time I was with a new character, Otis, and I'm enjoying this guy. And a precious brief moment away from her, she shows up and interrupts to say, "Hey, this looks like fun. Can I join in?" Aaronville has a sad moment with his mom. She interrupts to say, "Looks like we're having fun."
What the hell?
When Kona asks for a moment in private, she interrupts to invite herself along. Of course, there is also the last boss. Some of the most fun I had in the whole expansion. A boss who calls you the most dangerous threat to her plans. The boss even traps your companions, including Woklamat, and teleports them away rather than killing them for some reason. So it feels like your time to shine. But as Graha and Kryl are teleported away instantly, for some reason Woklamat isn't until several seconds later, as if we have to see her reaction to what is happening, but not the characters we really wanted and missed. But at about 35% of the boss's HP, Woklamat actually tears through reality to interrupt the fight and take center stage once again. I actually laughed my ass off when this happened because I could not fathom the absurdity of this decision. The plot puts so much unnecessary attention on Woklamat that she became a lightning rod for player dissatisfaction with the story.
I cannot believe this. I cannot believe this shit.
Fatigue is one thing, but players spent so much time with her that some think she's solely to blame if they didn't like it. But I maintain that the critical flaws of Dawntrail cannot be attributed to her actual character or actions alone, because she's 1,000 miles wide and 1 inch deep. There's nothing wrong with her love of peace and happiness, her earnest take on life, her sunny disposition. These are excellent starting points for a lovable character with orange cat energy that I was excited to travel with, but they remain starting points throughout. The laws of reality cater to her whims, undermining the integrity of the universe we're in and diminishing other characters who must operate within these skewed parameters. Speaking of people who have been done dirty, step aside. Kryl is the reigning champion of being sidelined, and it is something the character Kryl is vocally self-conscious about, making her treatment in Dawntrail feel almost cruel. Kryl was assumed to be a starring character for this expansion. She got a new design and became a Pictomancer too. But with so much focus on Woklamat, Kryl got tacked on to the end of zones, allowed to maybe ask one little question like, "Oh, excuse me, can you tell me about my earring?" The process of her seeking and finding answers happens almost entirely off screen, and she tells you about it after the fact. Very quickly with it, well, enough about me. She was relentlessly sidelined to the point that it felt like she only came with us to fill the trust spot at times. In the final zone, they wrapped up her story really quick in what felt like 10 minutes. But even the scene with her parents involved Woklamat in ways that was forced. Kryl's parents came from Alexandria to hand her over. Nobody has a bigger connection to living memory than her. Can you imagine how she must have felt to discover she's a double-only survivor? From the Isle of Val and now the Malala, you must imagine, because we never got a chance to explore those questions. What have we seen of Kryl's emotional journey? We missed the entire path that led to her resolution. Aaronville 2 though he was with us throughout and was one of the most relatable and consistently.
I just hate how they turn Erenville essentially into this brat that was there and consistently complaining about his mother's destiny and showing no understanding for what we were actually doing. I just felt like they made him sound 15 years younger, and he was one of the most beloved side characters in Endwalker, I feel, and I was very much looking forward to meeting Erenville in Dawntrail, and at the end of the expansion, I just felt disappointed by his character development because he actually started annoying me.
Written characters throughout the expansion still felt like he could have gotten a lot more focus, and I'm not just saying that because I'm obsessed with Erenville. Along with Kyle, I will say I shed tears during his goodbye
me too.
with his mom. I thought it was beautiful and sad. This was not a vacation for him. For Kona, I believe that they wanted to portray Kona as a character who's obsessed with technology and disrespects culture in the process, making him a less desirable candidate than Wuklamot. But this isn't supported by the narrative. The Hetzaru people in Shaloni say they're happy to use Kona's etherites and don't reject outside influences. In the Feet of Reeds, Kona devises a practical solution for their ailing crops, saying they need to embrace foreign knowledge because it can make light work of arduous labor. So there's no need to lug around heavy floats. And to be clear, he isn't saying, don't have your festival, it's stupid. He's saying, you don't need the boat to grow food. How can this be disrespecting their culture if none of the villagers remembered the boat's function for growing food before this? Kona's solution provides a reliable way to grow food when they're too weak to hold a festival or carry a heavy float. It's not a replacement forced upon them, but it's a life-saving option. If he had said, here's some Archon loaves, forget your reeds, I'd get it. But that's not what happened. It's bland dialogue, making designated good guys say only mild, safe things. Bad guys are over-the-top evil until they're not suddenly. There's a lack of nuance that would have been necessary. If you want to portray things like Kona's Charlian superiority complex while also getting across that he's a kind, thoughtful person, or Bakulja bluff and bluster while also getting across a quiet desperation to succeed, that requires some nuance in the writing that wasn't present in Dawntrail. I'd argue that Kona's curiosity about people he meets is better proof of respect than Wuklamot's ignorance and good intentions. She didn't try to educate herself on new cultures she expected to meet next, even after admitting that her ignorance was a problem. After Warkrazorm,
I just would like to know what she was doing that whole time. Who are the people who she was interacting with up until the point where she was a candidate for the throne? She would walk around the city, see all these different people, and never express curiosity for the people of different cultures and different races. And even if she wasn't curious, I'd like to think that her background and who she is would have forced this knowledge upon her, and she would have had to know who these or those guys are.
More, Kona asks if the location holds special meaning for the Yakui, demonstrating an interest in their culture. In the Feet of Repast, he thoughtfully listens to the history lesson from Wook Evu and asks relevant questions. So this idea that Kona despises tradition as outdated and unnecessary isn't convincing. It's something we're told and not shown. A Hetzaru kid says that Kona values technological advancement and efficiency to the detriment of all else, but Erenville is quick to rebuff him, saying he's not that bad and it's rumors. When he apologizes in his acceptance speech for failing to understand what he was too eager to cast aside, I felt frustrated because, to me, he was apologizing for stuff he didn't do. I was unconvinced. Says my own journey has taught me that culture isn't a hindrance to progress, but a shared value that binds us, connecting lives and generations. It felt as though the writers were going out of their way to ensure Wuklamot got the glory and the praise. But by the way, who talks like this? It's the same bland corporate voice that everybody speaks in that's just so pretentious and preachy. People were were shrugging and shaking their heads when he mentioned all of his amazing achievements and stuff, and they only cared when he said he wants to make them smile like his sister. And I found this really off-putting and minimizing. But also I'm expected to believe that regular people aren't impressed by trains, aetherites, and dirigibles, but only smiles?
I honestly felt that Kona had been disrespected and often mistreated in the writing, like when he was mocked for being worried about his sister, when he wasn't even asked first if he wanted to become Dawn's servant before seeing it engraved on a statue in front of everyone, the way he denounced the tools of war and said that he planned to use technology to safeguard Tyrell's peace through deterrence, just like Charlian did versus Garlemald. That is a realistic plan to keep the peace, yet for some reason he's not the one who really loves peace, according to every character.
As a proponent of better living through Charlian technology, Kona had the most validating experience of his journey in Mamuk, which was a huge success where Charlian technology transformed a culture for the better. This is what he believed in the most, and the reason he felt fit to lead. But affirmation only strengthens resolve for Wuk-Lamat in this story. Immediately after, he forfeits his claim because Wuk-Lamat is being nice. And that might sound like an oversimplification, but I'm afraid that's really all there is to it. He says, compassion, even for the likes of him. Then the choice is simple. The scene ends, and he surrenders the throne 2 minutes later. And with the wording, it implies that he had been thinking about surrendering the throne the entire time as well. But there's no good reason for this.
We just had a situation where you solve their food crisis with Charlian research. And this is the moment you're going to choose to back out. This is the moment that you think that you can't be a good claimant. That makes zero sense based on everything we know about you to this point.
The writers never bothered to show his inner thoughts in any substantial or meaningful way beyond, I care about my sister.
He never would have surrendered this throne because clearly he has their best interests in mind, and if he is the person with the Charlian knowledge, surely he wouldn't have just shot his tablet, would he?
Shows up in Shaloni, even though he grew up there as a nomad. He doesn't and can't visit Alexandria, even though he is our tech nerd. Like Kryl, Kona's potential arc is overshadowed by the need to elevate Wuk-Lamat and give her center stage at all times. He's underutilized, and so are Urianger and Thancred by extension, who just follow along and supporting Wuk-Lamat after his surrender. I kept thinking to myself, why am I not helping Kona instead? Y'shtola and G'raha arrive later on, and I was overjoyed to see them, but
even World of Warcraft with their separate routes on Alliance and Horde main storyline for expansions like the Battle for Azeroth or something like that have done this better. And I know it would have been a huge undertaking to create 2 separate MSQs where you have a choice to support this or that candidate or whatever. And even if it comes to the same solution where you have Koana and Wuk-Lamat sharing the throne, maybe a part of the MSQ could have been different and you could have seen different things, could have witnessed different cutscenes, could have had different dialogue, and it would have added the game a layer of replayability, which I don't necessarily think would be a bad thing.
Y'shtola didn't do much beyond guarding the portal. Finding pathways to other reflections has been her primary field of study since leaving Runar in Shadowbringers, so I was a little disappointed that we didn't see her scholarly enthusiasm about what it all represents. There just wasn't time for that. But Jaja has an abrupt change of heart immediately after his battle with Wook, which feels like it came out of nowhere. His tragic backstory
They've never been
and
born,
full
like
character
Jesus.
transformation are squeezed into one singular cutscene, where he goes from being an unrepentant cretin who unleashed Velagamanda on purpose, tried to kill Wuk-Lamat, stole her right of succession cube, and kidnapped her elector dad, to saying things like, that remains to be seen. Speak with the third promise. Share with her your worries and your pain. And together, we may find a new way forward, or we can't change the past, but we can try to make the future better. Those are real quotes from Jaja immediately after his abrupt change of heart. He doesn't even sound like the same person. Instead, he sounds like every other Dawntrail NPC, the one who repeats the same generically friendly and safe platitudes at every turn. We're expected to believe that he did evil things because he was desperate to prove himself. He says those children died so we could live. We had to succeed no matter what. To fail would mean it was all for nothing. And those are great motivations. But how do they correlate with his evil behavior up to this point? His concern for the innocent dead implies a compassion for life that contradicts what we know based on his actions on numerous occasions. When his friend needs a moment to rest, he says, "March or die." The friend pleads for mercy, saying, "Please, I sacrificed everything for the blessed siblings." If Bakul was really driven by extreme guilt over all the sacrifices made so he could live, wouldn't it bother him even a little to hear those words? His portrayal wasn't desperate to succeed so much as it was sociopathic comic book villain. So for such a dramatic change to be accepted by the player, we needed to see visible character development. I accept he could have a redemption arc. Although little of his internal struggle is shown on screen, you see him run away from Wook screaming, and dead baby pots that you have no context for at that point. You could charitably make the case that being humbled in combat by Zoraal-Ja and then again by Wook made him doubt himself as the almighty two-head. Seeing him get berated by his father even made me empathize with him. But there were countless critical steps skipped between Bakul Jaja doubting himself and then his sudden, unwavering support of and devotion to Wook. Again, it felt rushed and unconvincing, but so many characters rushed into loving her that it felt like another one bites the dust, so to speak, almost like they were getting tempered.
Understanding with Mamook? What sorcery did she use on them?
She held out her hand in friendship. Elderly Bunewa.
Bakul Jaja is a fun character later on, but his development left something to be desired. He also never faces punishment for his crimes, which cheapens the impact of things like Valagarmanda's release in retrospect. The writers established that anyone from each task could disqualify him on the spot if they so desire, but nothing ever comes from this. Maybe he'll do some community service in the patches. In some ways, I wonder if Bakul Jaja's
pick up shit from the ground
suited Zoraal-Ja. If Bakul Ja had, like, one jaw, been an obnoxious big brother who needs a reality check but doesn't do anything outrageously evil and ends up being your friend by the end. And Zoraal-Ja being the blessed siblings that countless babies were murdered to create, placing him under immensely crushing pressure to succeed. To me, that would make a lot more sense for Zoraal-Ja to go insane from that expectation and guilt, setting him on the dark path that led him to murder, genocide, and conquest. But Zoraal-Ja's villainy is later attributed to the burden of being the king's trueborn son. While many people accept this explanation, and it is far from the least believable motivation in Dawntrail, for me, it felt hard to swallow because of Galul Jaja's portrayal as a kind and compassionate father who was deeply invested in his children's success. I felt puzzled by Zoraal-Ja and struggled to fathom his leap from overburdened trueborn son and genocidal, patricidal maniac who abandons his own son in turn, claiming he was spurned by his father. Like, am I meant to believe this just because Galul Jaja didn't hand him the throne? He didn't seem spurned to me, having been treated with the same consideration as the other claimants. Also, it seems wildly irresponsible for Galul Jaja to let a child like this control the military, but that's a side issue. When we do meet Zoraal-Ja earlier in the plot, he says things that don't have much to do with his later character development. His bizarre philosophy that you need to teach the value of peace through war didn't make much sense. He calls the Garleans simpletons, but doesn't elaborate. Like, the line sounds badass on his own, but when you look at the full context of Garlemald and everything we as players have already experienced, this line being said and not elaborated on makes it read like an edgy 10-year-old made a new OC who's definitely cooler than the other big bad from the last story. Like, if I'm being honest, at no point did I feel I understood Zoraal-Ja. We just don't see much of his reasoning. I felt that there were some missed opportunities to develop Zoraal-Ja earlier on that
in general, it just feels like there's entirely too many characters and too little time to tell their stories, because Wuklaman's story has been overtold, and her story is just, I like peace, I like friendship, I like happiness, and that's that. Like, there was just no room, there was just no time.
could have led to more satisfying emotional payoffs in Alexandria and beyond. I did like the detail of a head of reason being missing during his trial, but again, I can't help but wonder, what if he'd been a two-head? And by the way, who's the mother of his child? No one asks. We spent so much time traveling with various beloved characters like the twins, and yet so little seemed to come out of it. Do you remember this interaction between the twins in Lido Loran, and how one silly comment can reveal so much and be so memorable?
Another self-important little brat. Just what we need.
Reminds me of my childhood.
But in Dawntrail, I just didn't see much of their attitudes or personalities. There just wasn't a lot of humor or snarkiness. After Wook and Bakuljaja make up and she says, "You're not a complete alpaca's ass," and his heads say together, "Thanks, Wook Lamad." Alice says, "Well, maybe it's for the best. Hatred is exhausting after all." And then Alphino, "Indeed, so let us make the most of our newfound friendship and bring together the people of Mamuk. We have much to discover." It's so dry. Like, this is not how these two behave at all. It just feels out of character. Even a little comment from Endwalker, like, "I can look after myself, you know." There's a fire and an edge, just a personality there that was missing. Trial has always been extremely witty and fun in conversation, with an endearing habit of poking fun at Alphino. She loved to challenge scholars who think that they're clever, hoping they'll rise to the challenge. And it would have been fun to see her do this to Kona, for example. And it isn't as though our companions didn't have substantive things to discuss throughout our long journey. Alphino's failure with the Crystal Braves is something that taught him many lessons he consistently used from that point onward, and he grew massively as a person and character because of it. He knows from hard experience that idealism and lofty ambitions aren't enough to succeed, yet he never offers any real insight or skepticism to Lamont when she exhibits naivety or ignorance. I often felt disconnected from characters I love, as they just weren't behaving like themselves. They weren't saying or doing anything offensive or anything wildly beyond the pale. It was just very bland, very safe, and worst of all, out of character. Many times it's just people listing off their respective tasks or who they'd pair up with in the next activity, so we all split off and then we repeat it again the next.
I don't think we realized just how good the previous expansions are with just not having all of these problems. It just felt good, but we couldn't pinpoint and identify the reasons why. And I think that Dawntrail has shown us what exactly we love about the previous expansions, which is so bizarre.
Next time. One Scion, however, who stayed in character and was a real joy every time he was on screen, who was definitely having his summer vacation, was Estinian. He was funny and charming, living this free-spirited life of an adventure that I so wished my character was having this expansion. As for me and my bunny girl, I never felt less free than I did in Dawntrail, being forced into choices and obligations that didn't feel natural to me at all. But not only that, feeling inept in moments where it didn't make sense for me to be there standing helplessly. Galul Jaja dying and Sphene doing her villain monologue. We know she's about to kill everyone and nobody tries anything. Yes, Emmet Selk did villain monologues, but they made sure every character couldn't just attack him. Like after he shot the Exarch, he immediately said, "Don't attack me or your Exarch friend is dead." He held the Exarch hostage throughout that whole thing, so it made sense why nobody attacked him. Give a reason why characters can't do anything. Again, I do want to emphasize that I don't dislike the concept for Wook Lamont, and I see her as another victim of the story's flaws rather than the cause of its shortcomings. She is overutilized and underdeveloped from a structural and literary standpoint. To see her in context of how she's integrated,
I think how I would describe her after listening to all of this and after thinking about her and playing through the MSQ, she's like, you know, one of those kids' bubble gums that you chew, and after like 2 or 3 minutes, they completely lose taste and even structure, and you just want to spit them out. She feels like one of those, except someone makes you chew on that one all day long. It's like in 2 minutes, it's lost taste, and you have to chew on it until it loses taste and structure and starts uncomfortably dissolving in your mouth.
integrated into the entire main story journey, she's far from the only character or element suffering from similar issues. It's not her fault. Like, it's not the fault of who she is that she or others have fallen flat. She doesn't deserve hate or vitriol, and I find a lot of the anger directed towards her to be really misguided, and I do hope that today's video can help people better understand and articulate the broader issues with the narrative and how they impact almost every aspect of it. Another thing I need to address here quickly is the music. Machinations needs to be stopped. It's time to let it go. This goes for many other overused tracks in the game. We have got to stop relying on the same handful of tracks over and over again for every little thing in cutscene. When I'm dreaming and I hear machinations, I know I'm having a nightmare. There was a moment I'll never forget where the Dawntrail theme music started to play, and I'm thinking, okay, something's cooking. All right, I'm getting excited. And then, without further delay then, all right, electric guitar, it's time to rock and roll, y'all. I'm ready for Master Chef Scion's edition. This is gonna be wild. What? No, not machinations! No! No! What?
Oh, it smells so good.
No way! No way! Why would they do this to me?
That's true. I can't deny that.
I'm being trolled by the devs. I'm like, here we go. We got the Dawntrail theme song. We're about to cook. It's gonna be awesome. No, f you. It's machinations. The other big topic for discussion with the music is Smile. I first want to say I have so much respect for Soken and the incredible music that this game has produced. I also enjoy the Solution 9 rendition of this song, but in cutscenes, and you probably know the ones, the song feels very out of place for the context.
So this song in particular feels like the 90s. To me, Smile feels like the song that used to be played on our local TV in the 90s during New Year's, as all of the most famous singers and actors and TV people would gather and they would sing a New Year's song, right? And this is somewhat what it would sound like, and it's a bit haunting and a little traumatizing to hear this kind of song because it's the same melody and it's like the same mood, the same vibe as the song would be played like every hour on the local TV channels over and over and over again, and to hear it in the game again and to just have this feeling of being a small child with this TV and like 3 or 4 channels, not to mention that even during this time we were experiencing like war and all these things in my country. It was a bit haunting to hear it.
It isn't. The tone and style clash with the atmosphere was unlike anything I have seen before in this game. At first I thought it was just me, but from what I saw, a lot of people feel the same way I do about this. It's clearly a song that is supposed to play in moments where you're meant to feel happy or excited, where everyone and everything comes together, but when it plays, it just doesn't work, at least not for me. I also want to talk about some expectations that people had for the beach episode. Things this expansion story was marketed as ended up not being accurate, and I know this contributed to some of the mixed reception that it's gotten.
We didn't go to beach
being
once.
Marketed as the best summer vacation ever. CGI trailer shows the Scions hanging out and chilling, having fun, being themselves. Thancred flirting with some girls, Stola studying a pillar, Eorzea with pina colada. This made me think that the former Scions will get a chance to breathe and be themselves. Like, what do they do when they're just hanging out, not trying to save the world anymore? But unfortunately, all of these scenes appear in the ending credits for Dawntrail, and in the actual story itself, the Scions are sidelined at best, and at worst, cardboard cutouts of themselves. It was marketed as a rite of succession. Yes, that there would be drama between the Scions due to the competition and taking different sides. We clashed with Thancred and Eorzea briefly once in a dungeon. And then nothing else happens with this. So calling this drama is borderline misleading. About low stakes. You arrive in Tyrol to discover that one of the claimants would like to establish an ethno-state, while another has plans for world domination through conquest. Though my impression of the latter was, good luck in Ishgard, idiot. They might have some experience fighting reptiles, and they might not need your lesson about how bad war is, but I digress. Considering the competition early on, and of course the alien attacks from Alexandria, I wouldn't describe the story as low stakes at any point. I would, however, call it muddy stakes for reasons I've already gone into. There were unclear stakes that impacted the momentum and smaller sub-stories with lower stakes, but for those expecting a low stakes expansion, generally this wasn't it. With Graha saying, since we averted the final days, it's been one existential threat after another, and now lives and all reflections hang in the balance. Now, there is one other thing that I want to mention, and it's something that is really deeply concerning me. It's about a pattern. Are they making an MSQ package? We know that they've made the dungeon package, which is 2 packs and a boss, 2 packs and a boss, 2 packs, a barrier, a boss. Are they trying to also make an MSQ package? Final area is filled with dead people. Final dungeon is you going through the memories of the main villain. The final dungeon is narrated by the main villain. The final dungeon is where the world is ending. The final area teaches you that nothing lasts forever and you need to let go and move on. The final area teaches you that there is hope. The final boss ends with them learning to appreciate and have faith in the heroes. How did this happen for the 3rd time? Technically 4, if you want to count 6.5's dungeon, where you go into Golbez's memories. Is every expansion just going to try and replicate Amarat as a final area? Living Memory reuses the same general narrative structure of Ultima Thule, but this time, rather than saying goodbye to each scion as we move forward, we say goodbye to each simulacrum. Namika, Kryle's parents, and Kefkiwa. The villain seeking to save the lives, preserve their people through genocide. There are a lot of interesting philosophical and psychological questions having to do with their consuming souls, absorbing memory, storing memory, and erasing memory that were not explored in any way. I think I need to talk more about that in a video about the regulators, because it's a whole other enchilada. In a lot of ways, it felt like a repeat of things that had already been covered without even attempting to cover the new, interesting narrative questions that could have been explored but weren't. In conclusion, I did not have high hopes for Dawntrail'S story, and I tried to go in with an open mind. But I truly believe that the literary standard has fallen below what I would consider to be the bare minimum for a story-based game, especially FFXIV. Beyond boring, it has been often incoherent. Beyond filler, it has been often hollow. I did not expect so many existing characters to repeat the same corporate platitudes in a singular supportive voice that served the almighty purpose of uplifting Wuklamot and affirming her shallow ideology. If you can even call 2 words an ideology. I think the writers wanted to build a world that is happy, thinking that it would make for a lighthearted expansion, but without grounding things in reality, or at least consistency, within the established rules and personalities of the setting. I struggle to go along for the ride. Logic makes a believable world, and simplistic...
I think that the only time building a happy world that reminds you of some sort of utopia that is filled with happiness, with this joy and friendship and everything, where everything is just so idealized. I think it only works well in horror movies, where there's a creepy underlying story of something going very, very wrong in that place. And I think that I would have much preferred to see a story like that than this attempt to construct a reality in which everyone is friends and they're living peacefully, and everyone is revolving around Wuklamats as an orbit, and they're just following her ideals so blindly. I think I would have much preferred that.
Solutions undermine its credibility. Complex issues like war, slavery, and the burden of leadership have been handled with subtlety and nuance in this game in the past. We've had whole expansions dedicated to these themes and what can go wrong when idealism doesn't account for the world's cold reality. Recall how Emmerich almost got murdered for his noble intentions to make peace with Dragonkind, Yatsuyu's conclusion that she was beyond redemption, and how Nanamo was nearly assassinated for attempting to reform Ul'dah for the better. For those who might feel I've been too critical of this story, I'm only judging it by the high bar that's been set. I enjoyed the parts I could very much and savored the good times as much as possible. So the least I can do is be honest with you, and I do wish I could have had more fun with it. Maybe next time, in the story patches maybe, I'll resonate better with the story. Story is the reason I got into Ffxiv. I have a creative writing degree. I almost went into a career path of being a research assistant at the English Lit department at my university. Story is what hooked me, and it's why I stayed in FF14. I was so impressed with the quality of the writing for an MMO when up to that point my main game had been World of Warcraft. I have, of course, enjoyed the gameplay. Bunny Boys, I've enjoyed more, but the story has always been number one for me, and my enthusiasm for the story is what's bled over into my love of other kinds of content. There is much, much more that I could say, but I think this video might be 2 hours long, at least 1.5 hours, so I think I want to wrap things up here, but I've said almost everything that I want to say about this story. I can only try to hope that the future story patches will improve. Why don't you let me know how you felt about the Dawntrail main story quest in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed hearing my thoughts in this video, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon or on Twitch. I'll have you know that I have started a new World of Warcraft channel where I am uploading content regularly for our times enjoying World of Warcraft. If you want to join me over on Zepla's WoW Realm, we also have guilds running that are popping off for EU and NA. I want to thank my Patreon and Ko-Fi subscribers for helping keep the channels afloat. I also want to thank my Omega Buns who subscribe at the highest tier. That's Jeanette B, Chris, and Pete Wilson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
I think there are many things that I would like to say about this video, but I've said most throughout it. I think that it would have probably been best for me to not have seen it ever, because if anything, this video just confirms a lot of what I don't know, didn't want to admit to myself or see even more, because I still do believe in this game. I love this game with all my heart, and there are some things that I got painfully reminded of that I just didn't expect to see and feel today. And I think that Zepla did a really good thing here, and I have to say massive shout out to both her and her editors for creating the video, for doing the research, and for giving people something very palpable to talk about and to basically submit as proof of what exactly went wrong. Because when you watch an hour of cutscenes and the actual analysis of what went wrong, and you see these lines in game, and you have someone point out to you how they don't clash very well together, I think that it's a very harsh I guess way to come back to reality for some people who have been, I'm gonna call them FF14 apologists at this point, because there are some things that we've seen in this video that you simply can't apologize for. And I'm definitely gonna need some time to kind of sit down and process, and my video is also getting very long. The original video is 1 hour and 13 minutes. I don't know how long mine will be. But in any case, thank you for watching it. Let me know how you felt about it. And again, please make sure to subscribe to Zepla's channels, like the original video, leave a comment there as well. and let me know in the comments how you feel about the video, the story, and so on. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Leave a like for good luck, leave a dislike if you hated this perspective, and if all you want to talk about is how Dawntrail was great and how nothing went wrong, that's fine. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.